Someone once said that weddings abide by Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will. Especially if there is a micromanager in the mix. We had one of those. We had a candlelight wedding with 8 attendants carrying lit candles down the aisle. The reason why I had so many was because I was 38 years old and had promised many a niece that someday she could be my flower girl. Oh well. The idea, as I tried to explain at our 2-hour rehearsal, was for each attendant to join her flame with that of the Christ candle, and then to extinguish it before finding the exact spot on which she was to stand during the wedding ceremony. Well, the problem was that for some reason, the Christ candle would not light. That's an embarrassment at any time, but at a clergy wedding, especially. We had 2 pastors working frantically to make it happen, as one after another of these 8 bridesmaids trustingly handed them their lit candles. And there's Dick, the waiting groom, watching it all happen, with a combination of amusement and genuine horror. Thankfully, tragedy was averted. There was no fire, and in God's own time, the Christ candle was ignited. The wedding at Cana was not an exception to Murphy's Law either. Everything had gone as planned. According to tradition, the bride would have been paraded from her father's house and escorted through the village to her husband's father's house, where the festivities were to begin in earnest. The identity of the wedding couple is not established. However, scholars speculate that the groom may possibly have been a nephew of Mary's, which could explain why she was so involved in overseeing the reception. The average guest would not have had the authority or the inclination to order someone else's servants to do anything, let alone to obey her son. But Mary did. At any rate, disaster struck because, in Mary's words, they had no wine. In other words, the supply was exhausted, but the guests were not. For a teetotaler such as myself, that would have been cause for celebration. But that was not the case for them. According to custom, without wine, there is no joy. For them, it would have been like hosting a dance, which had been scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp, only to have the band get up and leave at 7:30. Bad form. So Mary becomes proactive and calls on Jesus to do something to save the situation. And he does. And what does this first miracle reveal to us about who Jesus actually is? It shows 2 things. First of all, it shows us that Jesus was not a showman. He does not stand before the guests tapping on a wine glass and saying, "May I have your attention, please?" Nor does he wait for their hushed silence before intoning the words of magic, abracadabra. There's no black cape. There's no wand. Nothing like that at all. What Jesus accomplishes, he does without fanfare. The reputation and the honor of the host were at stake. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, Jesus remedies the problem. Clearly, Jesus' intention was not to draw any attention to himself. And I think it's interesting that the host may not have realized that anything at all had gone awry. And Jesus makes no effort to enlighten him. He doesn't say, my, what a mess you are in. Instead, he goes about his business with only his mother, the disciples, and the servants, aware that anything miraculous had happened at all. And that's it. The bride doesn't know anything. The groom doesn't either, and none of the other guests. All that they would have noticed was that the wine suddenly got better. Better even than when the wedding feast began. Years ago, my cousin, who was about 14 or 15 at the time, was tormented about the fact that she was overweight. Her heaviness made her absolutely miserable, and so much so that her mother took it upon herself to help remedy the problem. With the best of intentions, she would offer her daughter fiscal enticements. I will give you $5 for every pound you lose. But it was all for naught. Each new offer seemed to result in increased poundage. And then one day her father caught her crying and asked her what was wrong. And she explained that she hated her weight and she despised herself. The father listened and then made one simple statement that changed his daughter's life. It wasn't about dieting or about having sufficient willpower. All he said was, the more there is of you, the more there is for me to love. And that was it. And from that moment on, the water in her life, which had turned rancid, became a wine. Years later, she told him about what a turning point those very words had created in her life, and he said, I don't remember ever saying that. She never did get thin, actually. What she did do was to get into shape, and most importantly, to feel good about herself. And throughout these many years, she has owned her own fitness place where people go to get good body tone and to feel good about themselves, as she does about herself. I wonder this morning how many miracles Christ is working in your life right now, just by your saying or doing the simplest of things, which you may or may not remember even tomorrow. By saying I love you when you deem it unnecessary, by saying I'm sorry when you don't think it should have to be said. All those miracles we'll never know. But the point is that when we let the Spirit of Christ enter into our minds and hearts, and we allow him to give us easy things to do, we can feel the difference. It's like having our own lives transformed from being like plain tap water to being like wine, an exquisite wine. And if you can't see that happening in your own lives, you can certainly see it in others. Who remembers Christine Brooks? There you have it. It was William Sloane Coffin who said, life is like one big party at which Jesus makes sure that the wine in people's lives never runs out. And Jesus, even today, still uses us, deigns to use us to make his miracles happen. It's about doing easy things that he tells us to do and knowing that he's saving the best for last. Amen.